Welcome everybody to the continuation of Confucius Analects. The format is we're going to read a bunch of verses. We're going to have two readings, and then Jason and Amon are going to present their translation. Then we're going to invite everybody to comment. Please keep your comments at this stage, in the beginning, focused on the verses and try to be brief, because what we want to do is we want to have the first set of comments close to the text itself. And that's a way of respecting the text and trying to understand the text as best as we can. At the end, we'll have half an hour of going into any topics that you would like to discuss. All right, so that's the format. Let's hand it over to Jason. Jason, what are we starting with?
Yeah, let's start from the book 11. Book 11, I think it has 26, right? 20, let me check. Oh, 25, 25. I think 25 verses. And then let's start by so-called chapter by chapter. Total have the 25 chapters. And then let's start from the first one. Okay. So
wonderful.
Okay,
so folks, if you'd like to read, go ahead and type an exclamation mark in chat or raise your hand in Zoom. We're going to have two readings, and then we will go to Jason and Amon. Penny, go ahead.
Okay. Do you want me to just read one verse?
Just one verse, please.
Okay. And this is the James Legge. The master said, the men of former times in the matters of ceremonies and music were rustics. It is said, while the men of these latter times in ceremonies and music are accomplished gentlemen. If I have occasion to use those things, I follow the men of former times.
Right, would somebody else like to read? Go ahead and type an exclamation mark in chat or raise your hand in Zoom. Otherwise, I'm going to request Amon to read something. Amon, go ahead.
All right, I've got a translation here. I believe this is 10. I have to find my place first. Oh, no, sorry, I'm a step ahead. Here we go. The master said, the men of former times in the matters of ceremony and music were rustics, it is said, while the men of these later times in ceremonies and music are accomplished gentlemen. If I have occasion to use those things, I follow the men of former times.
Okay, thank you everyone, and I'm going to share my screen for the okay, in the book 11. Okay, book 11, Chinese call it 先进. I call it the first progress. Okay, so I think the book 11 is all. I think it's all about Confucius' disciples. Okay, so Confucius is going to comment on quality, achievement, potential of his disciples. So I think that's organized in this way in book 11. So let me read my translation, which will be different than most of other translations. Okay, so the master said, rustic men first progress in rituals and music. And I put a parentheses because that's implied, it's not in the original text. That means progress, first the progress in rituals and the music, and then working for the government. The nobility, and the actual word Confucius used here is 君子, which means the moral model. Work for the government first, and later progress in rituals and the music. In service, I will employ those who first progress. So here, Confucius means they have the two kind of people. One, we call it the rustic men. That means they have a common upbringing, common background. And then when they want to work for the government, they need to make progress in rituals and the music. And then they qualify to work for the government. Unlike the other kind of person who is 君子, and here 君子 means the nobility, has noble blood. Okay, so they automatically can work as a low-ranking government officer because they are young. They start to work for the government, and after they work for the government, they learn the rituals and the music. Okay, so Confucius said they have these two kind of person, and then in service, if I have to use them, I will prefer the former, which is the people with rustic men. They learn the ritual and the music, and then work for the government. So that's my interpretation, and well, that's my interpretation on this one. And there's some scholar also use this one. I borrow this one from one professor in Taiwan National Taiwan University, but I still include the traditional 朱熹's interpretation, which is common for most of translation, which said the master said the formal ritual and the music are rustic, okay, and the later rituals and music are noble, which like 君子 or gentleman. I prefer the formal when practicing. Okay, so that in this 朱熹's interpretation means the old time, long time ago, the ritual and the music are rustic, and the Confucius used the word like barbarian. And the later time, which means today's time, are more sophisticated, which are noble, like 君子, okay, gentlemen. So if I have to use one of the rituals and the music, I would prefer the old one, even they are kind of barbarian, or you call it the rustic, which also make a lot of sense because Confucius, you will see in this whole book, Confucius try to make sure, you will rather keep a little bit conservative than too aggressive, moving too much. So that makes sense. But the reason I kind of choose the other one, reject what 朱熹's interpretation is, the entire book is talking about Confucius' disciples. So I believe this one, the opening one, should also talk about people's qualification. For this reason, I think this interpretation makes more sense because he's talking about two different kinds of people. So that's, I include the two different interpretations. So Amang, what you
Thank you. I was very pleased to see you keep Zhu Ji's translation or interpretation of this passage in here, because it has become sort of the handed down version. There's something at work here that I think demands attention, and that is the way that Jason and you interpreted it really brings home something that is unusual in the Analects, and that is the use of the term 君子 in an almost pejorative manner. Normally the 君子 throughout the Analects is held up as the perfect version or the best version of noble men. In this passage, it's used almost as you can almost feel Confucius saying the 君子 now, their music. And so he's referring to those that are commonly referred to as 君子, the noblemen. And he's being a little snobbish towards them because he doesn't feel that they capture a tradition, a rich tradition that does exist among the rustic folk, the common folk. This passage really paints Confucius in the vein of someone like a Dostoevsky, a real sort of peasant romance, if you will, for those who cling to tradition, they cling to, the old ways for real, as opposed to those who dress it up with airs and those who are simply trying to progress. So I really do like this interpretation better, because although that's unusual in the Analects, I think it is significant, because he's telling his students, don't be junzi, really be noblemen, really be, perfected men.
Thank you, Amon. Folks, now this is the time to comment on this particular verse. Go ahead, just keep your comments brief and on this verse. Would love to hear from you. Go ahead and type an exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom if you would like to comment. All right. Looks like there are no comments. Oh, there are comments. Penny.
Oh, I had a quick question, because I thought that we studied previously, like the nobility or the junzi, that, they were given an education and that they would be taught things like rituals and music, as along with some of the other areas of study.
I think that sort of study became formalized with Confucius. He was the one who made the study of ritual and music a formal prerequisite for somebody to obtain the status of being a junzi, and forever after that became the norm. Prior to that, the training would not necessarily include that as much. It would very heavily focus on literacy and might be very geared towards a functionary purpose. If you were going to inherit a role in government, then you were probably taught as almost a technocrat to do that role and do it, very well.
Amon, I had a question. This is for both Amon or Jason, whoever wants to answer it. Why is it that rest of the Analects has the same, I can't pronounce it properly, in a positive sense, and why is it in the negative sense here?
Let me put this one. Okay, I think the third matter go to my, or my kind of interpretation, or Zhu Xi's interpretation. It's difficult this chapter, because just like Shrinkan said, why Confucius prefer non-junzi, right? If you're junzi, is it he been talking about that's the goal you have to do. You have to be a junzi, don't be the small man. But only this one, he said he prefer this one. Doesn't matter how you explain, always has problem. Okay, even in Zhu Xi's explanation, still has a problem, because why you use the word junzi here. So only way can understand is junzi has two meanings. One is you have noble bring up, okay, as a low-ranking nobility. So you're being called junzi. Doesn't matter you are idiot or you are criminal, as long as you has this kind of blood, you are junzi during that time. And they have the government position guaranteed. So Confucius' general rule of his education, social responsibility is when you've been junzi is not only achieved by your blood, also can be achieved by your effort. So if you work hard, you do something, blah, 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 you will become a junzi, and you set this one as a goal. So that's his pedagogical idea, and that's all he wants to do. And here, only thing to make sense on this sentence is we take junzi's meaning, not Confucius' teaching of the later human effort junzi, take it as an innate junzi, okay? Then that's the only way to make it sense. But of course, I don't know what Confucius meant, and I don't know why they write this way, but I see the text here has been handed down for 2,000 years. And I think that's the only way to interpret.
And Jason, I think you're absolutely right. And that's why I say this is the one occasion where it's almost pejorative. your interpretation, your translation brings that forward in a big way. Zushi is kind of almost softballs it in by saying, the music now is noble. He preferred the rustic. It's almost a throwaway, like that's just his proclivity, that's his taste, but nothing in here is meant to be throwaway. And I do think that Jason brings this forward, that he is slighting those who would call themselves junsa, who haven't really earned it. And he's extolling his students, earn it for real.
Wonderful, thank you. All right, what's the next set of verses, Jason?
I think we have two more comments from Mark.
I'm sorry, I didn't see them.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mark.
I think David go first.
Thank you. Great to see everybody. I'm just wondering why it sounds to me like Confucius is making some sort of a generalization. And he's not saying there are these two different types of men or maybe women, I'm not sure, but I will judge each one as they come to me. Maybe a good one will be rustic, but maybe there'll be one who is a Junzi and will also have achieved an important level.
So let me respond to you. You say Confucius makes such a generalization. I'm not sure I have a better answer on that, but I think this sentence a little bit generalization, and I would say, all moral teacher generalize something. So, but I compare to other people, I would say Confucius is not so generalized, because if you look at on the rest of this book, right, from 2 to 25, he target on each single disciple. See, that's what you, that's you, that's you, that's you. So I will say, except this sentence, the first line, is more generalization than others. But in general, Confucius' teaching is very individual, human, individual specific. That's my opinion.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, I would ask you if in spirit, not as a literal translation, but in spirit, in more modern terms, you would see this as a sort of division in two types of schooling: the schooling in the material and operational, applicable directly, practical short-term practice. So apps, state-of-the-art techniques, the apps and tools that are current technology, versus the humanities, the traditions, arts, literature, religious, old social wisdom, and the classics, which have sort of are passed down in a slightly different way. They're more through familiarity with an entire practice, a social sort of existence, and that this is ritual and music are not taught to two people in exactly the same way. You pursue your track in it, but when you're schooled in how to calculate ledgers, do mathematics, account for things, that's complete uniformity. You want a kind of inter-replaceability of one person doing as somebody else, as opposed to judging things at a more humanistic level. So these are two kinds of education. One is like econometrics, and the other is classical, study of. We think of these two kinds of tracks nowadays. Does this tie back to you? Yeah,
I think you hit on something here, but there is a caveat in the line that says, the junsa first work for government, later progress in rituals and music. And so there's almost this indication that these individuals who are benefiting off nepotism will come to culture over time, almost by osmosis or by default, or just by being in the office and doing the rituals with everybody and finally asking the question, why the hell are we doing this in the first place? And then getting answers. And so it's almost learning by ad hoc that will come from that upbringing, whereas an intentionality exists within the rustic folk to uphold rituals, uphold ceremony, uphold tradition. And I don't know if sort of the technocrat versus the well-rounded humanity dichotomy necessarily works as well here, but I do think there is an idea of the values of conserving versus the blind full steam ahead of, service for service sake.
Yeah, industrial revolution. Now we learn this. Now we do it this way. Next thing. What about the what were we doing before? What are the old ways?
Yeah.
Right.
Wonderful. I really like this discussion because it is so tight. Wonderful. So let's continue. Jason, what are the verses
let's
next?
do the 2 and the 3 together because I believe
Okay.
they are the same. They should be continued. So.
All right. Penny, can I volunteer you for the first reading? And then anybody else who wants to do the second reading?
Yes. Verse 2. The master said, of those who were with me in Chinankai, there are none to be found to enter my door. Verse 3. Distinguished for their virtuous principles and practice, there were Yan Wan, Ming, I don't know how to pronounce these Chinese names right, Ming Zi Qian, Ran Bo Nui, and Zong Gong for their ability in speech, Zai Wo and Zi Gong for their administrative talents, Ran Yu and Ji Lu for their literary acquirements, Zi Yu and Zia.
Joe, can you handle moderating from now on? I need to take a call. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And Penny, I have to say, for not being sure how to pronounce Chinese names, you did quite well.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Does anyone else have a reading, or did you want me to read again?
I don't see anybody volunteering. So
All right.
thank you. I have the same version that actually Penny just read. So
Okay. Chapter 2. The master said, of those who were with me in Chan and Sai, there are none to be found to enter my door. Verse 3. Distinguished in their virtuous principles and practice, there were Yan Yuan, Ming Chan, Zan Po Nu, and Chong Kong. For their ability in speech, Zai Wo and Zai Kong. For their administrative talents, Zan Yu and Qi Lu. For their literary acquirements, Zi Yu and Zi Sai.
Okay. Thank you for all. Try very hard to pronounce all this name, and then this one is kind of like in the Bible, which part, the reckoning or something, the numbers, right? So it just call all the numbers, all the tribes, everybody's name. So, but okay, I would like to put 2 and 3. Traditionally, people read 2 and 3 together. Okay, and again, this one, my interpretation, I put here from the Dr. Fu Peirong from National Taiwan University. He has different interpretation. So I decided his interpretation make more sense than the traditional interpretation. Okay. So let me read the Zhu Xi's interpretation. The master said, none of those who follow me in the state of Chen and Cai are still with me or in my door. Okay. So he mentioned Chen and Cai because when Confucius traveled around the world, I mean China, in the state of Chen and Cai, they had the civil war and Confucius really stuck there, and they are very dangerous. And Confucius almost died. He depends on Zilu to bring food for him, otherwise they will die. So it's a very dangerous time, during this time. So Confucius said, the disciple who follow me from the state of Chen and the Cai are not with me anymore, but which is not historically correct. Some of them died, but some of them still with him. So they had not been leave Confucius. They stay with Confucius until Confucius' death. So in this interpretation doesn't make sense. So the reason is the men, the gate. So usually we consider this gate means the school gate. That means you are not in this gate anymore. You are not in my school anymore. So actually it's not true because they are loyal followers to Confucius. So they should stay with them. So only way to interpret the word gate is the royal gate. So Confucius said, when I'm in danger, none of my disciples, even they are with me, they don't have the access to the royal court. That's why we are in danger. And then he continued talking about different discipline in his school with different people. So he mentioned all these people. So if we put these two together, you will see Confucius is not talking about the student is no more with me. On the opposite, Confucius should talk about this student. They have no access, no way to reach the royal court in the state of Chen and the Cai, but they are still with me. And these are 10 students he's talking about. So in this way, probably make logically sense in this way. So I will put this way in the translation, I will call the master said, none of those who follow me in the state of Chen and the Cai have access to the court, to the royal court. Okay, then he continued. Okay, he has 4 categories as virtuousness, rhetoric, governance, and philology. Okay, so in the virtuousness is Yan Hui, Min Ziqian, Ran Boniu, Zigong. Zigong still alive. Okay, Ran Boniu, Min Ziqian, and Min Ziqian also is alive. Yan Hui and Ran Boniu died. That's true. Okay, and the rhetoric, which is speech. Zai Wo, if you remember the guy who challenged Confucius, okay, or sleeping during the daytime, okay, that's Zai Wo. It's rhetoric, good in speech. Zigong is good. He said he can be the diplomat because he's good in the language, the speech. Governments, which means they have administration skills. Zilu is the person who died, of course, and Ran You, right? It's they are doing. I think he's the financial expert. Philology, okay. Chinese called 文学 and okay, I will explain later. Okay, 子游, 子夏, these two are the young students. So he categorized to the 10 of his important students in the 4 categories: virtuousness, rhetoric, governance, and philology. So another question would be, why is these 4 categories, right? My understanding is this 4 means how you behave, how you act, right? And how you speak, right? And how you work, practice, all right? And how you study the philology, basically. At that time, there's no other subject to study. When Confucius talk about study the ancient rituals in music, which equivalent to today we talk about philology. So basically you read about the antique document. That's what Confucius means. And one thing I'd like to bring up is the last category, 文学, right? I translate as a philology, and then a lot of modern translation will call it the literature. Okay, so because 文学, this Chinese word in today's Chinese, means literature, okay, like a novel, poetry, all this kind of thing we call literature. But I don't think that's Confucius mean. That's why I would like to call it philology or ancient document study. Another interesting is Dr. Eno translate this one as a pattern study. So Dr. Eno very consistently call this word 文 as a pattern. I still don't get it. I still disagree, but I may change my mind later. But at this moment, I still don't know why he call it pattern. So Amang, please.
I think you did an excellent job with your translation. And yours makes more logical sense. Like you said, there were those who fled this dangerous time with him and were still with him. So why would he, rail that none of these people who followed me are with me, unless we're getting a glimpse into, a sort of self-defeated or fatalist or nihilistic moment in Confucius' life. And I don't think that's what it was. I think the idea that none of these people, who were weathered this dangerous time with me now have good job prospects, that makes a lot more sense and is consistent with the master's common concerns for his students. Can you get somewhere where you can be influential? And then he goes to enumerate those students and their virtues. This almost has a letter of recommendation quality to it. It's very similar. Beyond that, it's worth just taking a moment to appreciate this chapter as a whole. I always think of this as the intermezzo. This is the chapter where you get to see behind the curtain what's going on between Confucius and his students and how he really feels about them, what he really thinks of them in a very sincere sort of way, because Zaiwa took a lot of flack at Confucius's hands earlier in the Analects. And now he's saying Zaiwa is a rhetorician, and he's he is a good rhetorician, if that is what I am going to acclaim him for first and foremost. The timing is always a little iffy because he mentions Yenwei here. And if Yenwei is dead at this time, it almost wouldn't fit the pattern of here's me recommending my students. But again, taking all these things together, somebody may have read it and said, there's no way he could have left those people out of this list if they just looked at that list. And so they added them in, probably rightly so, versus if this was done for a function, we ran away from, a civil war twice. Now these very noble and accomplished students are incapable of getting employment. You should look at their virtues and then consider hiring them. I could see where that makes a lot of sense to me.
Thank you, Amon. So now we'll open it up for comments. Keep your comments brief and just comment on the text, please. Kwan.
Okay, I have two comments. First, I will try maybe to suggest an answer or a defense of Dr. Eno's choice for pattern concerning the Chinese character one. I would like to read a very short definition of pattern, okay? A pattern is a regularity in the world, in human-made design, or in abstract idea. As such, the elements of a pattern repeat in a predictable manner. Here, the human pattern within a civilization, within a group, can be named as culture. And we know that one of the possible translation for Vaden is also culture. So a culture is precisely a regularity in the human world within a certain group, okay, because that those elements that are designed and that would be repeated in a predictable manners are the values, the culture, and the that is upheld by a given culture. And in that sense, it's a pattern or a structure, if you want. And often the structure of that pattern is transmitted through certain texts called classic, okay? And if you look at the Chinese character classic Jing as written in the traditional manner, you have a 3 chevron indicating the weft of a cloth. So it's symbolic also of a pattern. So the pattern as a structure of values transmitted by a group of humans, but also written in some special text called classics. So that's it's my short defense of Dr. Eno's translation of Van as pattern, which is a kind of equivalent to culture for me. The other stuff that I want to say is that 1, 2, and 3 for me are even. I would say that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is really a group or and unity, because at 1 he started by saying that I prefer those who were first in Li and music, and rather than a Junzi who would be advanced in Li and music later on. Okay, and I agree with the explanation which have been given, in the sense that those who were born within the nobility, often they wouldn't have access to the court because of their birth, and they wouldn't get on a certain job because they have been trained to do so, but they would not necessarily ask themselves the deeper questions about the structure of the universe, the music, the ritual, and etc. And those who were not born within the nobility, but who got access to governmental offices through their classical education, will be exposed at a younger age to deeper philosophical questions before they get a job at court, precisely. So if I want to use the philo Bible to say those things, it's the interaction between time and timelessness. Those who got the classical education first, let's say, were more familiarized with the timelessness dimension of the education before having the practical experiences in the time dimension of the job at court. And it's a little bit what Confucius meant at 11.2 precisely, because those who were with him in difficult circumstances in Chen and Tsai were precisely the people who were willing to go with him to those difficult circumstances, because they have been imbibed deeply in those timelessness values. So they were willing to share with him those difficult times, rather than the aristocrat, the born aristocrats who would never go with him. And 3 would be a short enumeration of the different talents that some of his disciples have. And once again, and I finish in 3 seconds, the dialectical opposition in Chinese culture between the virtues, okay, shining forth from the timeless reality, and the talents that you can acquire by training. And for example, that you would be good in speech governance and etc. And even for virtuous conduct, okay, I would push as far as that, because you can be a good imitator, but it's only in difficult situation that your behavior would be exposed positively as reflecting something real inside, or just behavior because you learn how to behave at court or in society. I stop here.
Fantastic comments, Quan. Does anybody else wish to comment on verse 2 or 3? Okay, I mean, if not, we will continue to move on, I just would actually just I would have a quick question for Jason or Amon. I mean, it's interesting because I was actually when I go through some of my Greek and Stoic philosophy, it seems like this aligns with logic, number 3. So like the disciplines themselves. So is that essentially what I mean, Confucius is teaching here is like the idea of how to the student things that he appreciated by these particular students is their ability to reason. I mean, is that?
Okay, I think that's great. You talk about the last category, right? You think?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's I just want to talk about this, but I just don't want to occupy too much time.
That's fine.
Like Quan talking about why Eno talk about this one as a pattern study, and so I also read this part from Dr. Eno, and then I just say I agree with his argument, but I cannot agree with this argument imposed to the Confucius teaching. Okay, put this way, because it's very misleading, just like Joe is talking about. It could be the logic because you learn the pattern from the ancient, you understand what's going on there. So in a way, you are talking about logic. But this part, I just have to reject it because I truly believe Confucius doesn't have a good logical sense on this one. I'm not talking he's an irrational person. I'm talking about he has no concept of our Aristotelian syllogism or the deductive logic in the geometric term. Okay, so I think he doesn't have this kind of concept. That's why I think translate as pattern probably totally westernized thinking. So my understanding is read it, understanding this one, and then that's my view, and that's why I disagree with Dr. Eno. But that's just me, and again, you don't have to agree with me, but that's what my point.
No, thank you for that. Quan,
If I could, real quick.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, Quan, but I wanted to define philology for those who are unfamiliar. It's the study of structure, historical development, and its relationship to language and languages, which is why I think philology as a translation for when in this context is spot on.
Yeah, and that's the reason I asked about logic, actually, in that particular instance, because the Greeks looked at rhetoric as logic is actually essential. So the ability to be able to speak and understand clearly was part of that. So that's the reason why I made that association. It was more along the lines of language, less along the lines of syllogisms. So, Quan.
I think that it's true that I believe absolutely that Confucius and his school were devoting themselves to philology, meaning the study of ancient texts, their meaning, and etc., and what is the impact for their time. And that part I have no problem at all. However, I want to say that the word, the pattern here doesn't have to be taken in a too logical meaning, okay? In the sense that a culture is a vehicle to transmit a certain regularity of representation of the word, okay? And those representation, most of the time, if we use ordinary words, are the beliefs of that culture, the values of that culture, and a certain repetitive representation as the basic understanding of that culture about the inner world and the outer world. In that sense, pattern as a regularity of the human design called culture doesn't have to be correlated or coexistent with a logical discipline as the Greek had it, for example. And that's what I mean.
Thank you. Thank you, Quan. And so if there are no other comments, we can move on.
Yeah, that next time let's read 4, 5, and 6. Okay. Okay, so that's the Confucius talk about his three students, Yan Hui, Min Ziqian, and Nan Rong, three students.
Penny, would you be so gracious?
Sure. We're starting with number 4.
Four.
The master said, "We gives me no assistance. There is nothing that I say in which he does not delight." 5. The master said, "Filial and dead is Min Shi Chan. Other people say nothing of him different from the report of his parents and brothers." 6. Nan Rong was frequently repeating the lines about a white scepter stone. Confucius gave him the daughter of his elder brother to wife.
Thank you, Penny. Ahmad, would you?
Certainly.
Thank you.
Let's see. We are on verse 4. The master said, "Boy gives me no assistance. There's nothing that I say in which he does not delight." Verse 5. The master said, "Filial indeed is Minsa Chan. Other people say nothing of him different from the reports of his parents and brother." Verse 6. Not Ranyo was frequently repeating the lines about a white scepter stone. Confucius gave him the daughter of his elder brother to wife.
Thank you, Ahmad. Jason?
I read that wrong. Non-one. Sorry.
Okay, number 4. Okay, I keep us. So first, number 4. The master said, Yan Hui, again, Yan Hui is his best student. Okay, Yan Hui gives no assistance to me. He just delights in everything I say. Okay, I just have to translate word by word. Okay, 助 means assistant, help. So why he has no help for the best student? Only thing I can say is, because you are such a good student, you never challenge me, you never ask tough question. Like Zaiwo always ask tough questions, so so it's difficult, you know. So if all students are like Yan Hui, I probably making no progress. That's I have to interpret this way, and do have some scholars see this way. Among make another suggestion. I put in the blue. Yan Hui's master said, Yan Hui makes no pleas to me, and he just denied in everything I said. Okay, it's similar, but it's he explained 助 assistant help as asking for help or something like this. So I think that's what he meant. Yan Hui is the best student. Okay, everything I said, he is happily accept. So on the other way, Zaiwo, okay, is constantly challenge Confucius. So okay, that's opposite, but both should be considered good students.
So what was the word? What was the word Aman had recommended?
Please, this word.
I'll
Right.
explain it when I have comment. Go ahead, Jason.
Okay, number 5. Okay. The master said, how Xiao Min Ziqian was. People say nothing of him different from the words of his parents and brothers. So two things. The first thing, Min Ziqian has been listed as so-called 24 filial exemplars in the later time, because he being considered one of the exemplars for practice xiao or filial piety. I think it's because he has a stepmom, and then they are poor, and the stepmom gives the Min Ziqian, because stepmom has 2 of her own son, and then so of course the stepmom favored her own son and not the stepson. So when they make the winter clothes, he give the bad one for Min Ziqian and the good one for her own son. And then Min Ziqian always feel cold. And then his father find out that was very angry to his second wife. But Min Ziqian asked for his father to forgive the mother, because if you kick out or divorce the mother, there's more kids suffer. And if they stay with stepmom, only I suffer. My stepbrothers will not suffer. So that's his idea. That's why he become one of the exemplar of the Xiao filial piety. Okay. So that's the reason. Okay, he has been talking about. And the second thing, Confucius talking about the people talking about him is no different than his parents and the brother talking about him. In a way, it's important in Chinese culture because if parents always feel shame to tell like, oh, my son is not treating me well, they say, oh, he's very well. So it's no different. So that means he's truly practice filial piety or xiao. Number 6, need a little bit explanation because Nanrong, okay, is one of the Confucius student who is in the remember, there's 3 houses that in the Meng house. Okay, so is the Meng house? Okay, so the house Confucius tutoring. So that's one of Confucius' students in the early time. So Nanrong frequently recite the Ode of the White Jade. Okay, so this one is from the book of Ode. Okay, so Confucius was very happy, marry off his older brother's daughter to him. Okay. So a few things, okay, we need to talk about this. One is, what's the Ode of White Jade? Okay, I copy here, that's from the book of Ode, okay. The poem is read like this: a flaw in a white jade could be polished away, but a flaw in one's words could not be fixed. All right, so that's the meaning. So Nanrong is very cautious on his word. Okay, so if you go back on book 5, chapter 2, okay, it's also say the same thing. He said, Master said of Nanrong, if the state is well governed, he won't be out of office. If the state is ill governed, he can evade the punishment and execution. Okay, so he is very cautious on his word. So even in the tyrant rule, he will not be punished and killed, and it's very safe. That's why Confucius married off his older brother's daughter to him, as a reward. Because they appreciate this one. And again, get another question, right? Why Confucius marry off his older brother's daughter? Why Confucius, can make a decision on that? Confucius actually has 9 older sisters and 1 older brothers, but Confucius is the youngest. But Confucius is the one was born by the wife, because his brother was born by the concubine, which not considered as the not in charge of the family. Another way to talk about it is he could be die early. His older brother could die early. So actually, Confucius was the in charge of the house. Okay. So called family. Yeah. Thank you, Amal.
Okay, so I am going to drop something into the chat. Anyone can look at it there. I won't call it even a disagreement. It's just a question of interpretation. And I like Jason's interpretation of giving no assistance in the context of, if you never challenge me, I don't advance myself. And therefore, since Yanhui gave no assistance or no challenges to him, it never gave Confucius cause to increase himself. I think that that is a very viable translation. The question I had, and I appreciate that you kept the other interpretation there. Classic Chinese is singular character. And what has happened in modern times is it's become dual syllabic, so that very often two words will be used together to clarify, because otherwise one word might have so many multiple meanings that without context, without understanding, it could get lost. My question would be, could Confucius or could the Analects be using the term "ju" here in the connotation that in modern Chinese would be "qiu ju," which is to request help or to request aid? And if it were to be interpreted that way, then instead of not giving challenge, then making no plea is a viable way of translating that. And so I offered that up as a suggestion, but not as a definitive, it means this, not that, because I don't know any more than anyone else. Other than that, just real briefly, we have Yang Hui, Ning Sichen, and Nanrong, which I said the wrong name before, who are being once again selected out, and their qualities are being demonstrated. It is interesting that his favorite student, Yanwei, is being talked about in a, I won't even call it negative, but not what I would call glowing light. It's almost, if you say that he gave you no assistance, then yes, he may have loved this student, but he's obviously seeing a flaw within his character. With Mingzi Chan, he's saying, this man is Xiao. This is how you are Xiao. And how you know he's Xiao is that reports back are identical to what you hear from his family. He's not, one way in public and another way behind closed doors. He's consistently the same Xiao character that he was. And Nanrong, he's talking about making him an in-law, making him part of the family. It's hard to conceive of sort of a higher elevation he could give somebody. My suspicion, just because of the orders of these and just because it logically makes sense, is had Yanhui survived, it would be Yanhui that he was marrying off into his family, not Nanrong. But given that Yanhui was dead, Nanrong was a good runner-up for admission to the inner sanctum of the Confucian family. So that's all I have to say about that. I hope that clarifies also why there were two interpretations there. It's not because I'm saying it means this, but it could mean this.
Thank you, Ahmad. So we have David followed by Kwon.
Yeah, I would say that embedded in that first one is that whole lesson without a lot of detail about what it is to be a sharp student and to be a good student. So when you're teaching, you give something for the students to reflect on, and the students expand the lesson and put it out until they reach the limit, knowing, well, it goes this far. So there's an expansion and a limitation. If there's no questions coming back from the student, then it's all in their minds. They haven't checked the bounds that the teacher, to see if the teacher was actually teaching something, speaking too loosely. The First Amendment is absolute. Well, it's not absolute. So, it's the First Amendment, and you have to see the bounds. So this is a teacher clearly delivering the message or letting it go into the wind where, the other students can be left drawing conclusions that exaggerate the message. Or has the teacher actually made an error? And now, because you're not checking them, that's going to get ignored. So the sharp student has to both be working on generalizing and limiting in a lesson they hear, and recognizing whether the way it's said cuts the way they cut it. If they're that sharp, and they're not alone in their head, They're not isolated, so they should be sharing with the others, the class and the teacher. And the value is checking and validating what they're thinking and verifying and correcting what is said and how it's shared. So yeah, the student should be resisting. When you teach, it's not all take, agree. You're pushing against nothing, right? So that's the problem with this student. They don't resist. Good student resists. That's all.
They were very good comments. Thank you, David. I don't know if anybody wishes to respond, but if not, we'll go to Juan.
Yeah. What I mean here is that it's possible, it's a kind of ironical compliment of Confucius to Yan Hui. And it's interesting what David just said, because it's true that for, let's say, the average or the little bit above average student would offer some resistance because they don't understand at all, or because they are capable to go deeper than the first layer of meaning or understanding of what the teacher just said. But I think there's a third case, which is Yan Hui, because Yan Hui is like another Confucius, okay? Because the sentence is, there's nothing in my words that fails to please him. Meaning that the two are on the same wavelength, if you want. And not only Yan Hui is capable to understand the first level of what Confucius was saying, but also to go to the different layers of interpretations of meanings. So it's true that in the more down-to-earth teaching duties, that kind of student is not very useful, of course. But at the same time, if we accept that Confucius is truly an advanced person, it means that Yan Hui was, I cannot find another way to say it than on the same wavelength. So an alter ego, if you want. I stop here.
He was on the same wavelength as Confucius, you're saying?
Yeah, in terms of being, okay, because in this chapter we're not only speaking of information and skills. Once again, okay, it's always the same stuff. Either with Greek philosophy or Chinese philosophy, you have the information and the skills, okay, what the talents, and you have being, okay, the virtues, okay, but the virtues not imitation of a good behavior, but the good behavior shining forth because of the activated presence of the inner reality of beauty, goodness, and truth. Okay, so here, so Yan Hui, even he was a student in the historical sense and in the real sense of Confucius, of course, and I'm sure that he learned many stuff from Confucius. But in terms of being, and here maybe it's my own religious beliefs that that is playing here. I think that certain persons are born with a higher being. Okay, so even if Yan Hui was younger than Confucius, he might have the same wavelength, meaning he might have the same being, even if I'm sure that Confucius taught him certain skills and certain information. But in Confucianism, it's not the skills and the information that is the important stuff. The important stuff is being, as all of you understood, of course.
Thank you so much, Juan. Jason, do you wish to comment?
Yeah, I think I just get an idea when we talk, listen to all the comments on the chapter 4. I think everything here, when everything we write about Yan Hui in this book, or most part of Analects, is during after the death of Yan Hui. So Confucius talking about this after death of Yan Hui. So he is signed, okay. So he said, alas, Yan Hui cannot help me anymore. Okay, that's his point. Okay, because he he dead already. And the second part is say how good he is. Okay, that's just a thought I'm thinking. And I didn't see any scholar talk this way, but I think that could be another way to say it, you know, because later on you will see Confucius has a lot of not complain, sign, okay, he said, alas, he died. Too bad. So I think that's probably in the same tone.
Thank you, Jason. David, do you want to follow up?
Yeah, I've a question about, so is Confucius imparting to his followers largely on a one-to-one style, or are there times when they're in groups? Because if it's one-to-one and you're in sync, I can understand you don't need to necessarily respond. You have such an intimate sort of relation with the words being used. But when you hear something said and you consider how others hear, then you're looking at the way it's said. It can't always be the same way you would say it. I mean, I don't know if you're exactly on that kind of frequency, but it's it leaves open the question. If you're in a group setting, you might serve the community by circumscribing the words used and saying, is that the same as saying this? You know what I mean? So it's a different role if you're in a group learning. So how do you, I'm just asking, you know, socially, how do you figure Confucius was imparting?
I like to answer this question because Confucius' way of teaching is different than today's classroom teaching. Okay, and it's more individual than group lesson, so he tend to comment one-to-one individually, but there's no private conversation. There's nothing like I told Yanhui this way and nobody knows. There's nothing like it's open door, and but more one-to-one. That's my understanding. And I think the chapter 26, the last one on this book, is a wonderful setting about how Confucius teaches. So David, if you are into this one, make sure you read the last one, because he has with a few students sit down together, then they chat and the Confucius will comment on each one's topic. So that's kind of like in our Zoom meeting today. Everybody say your opinion, comment on each one, and you also comment on your peers' opinion. So yeah.
Thanks.
Quan.
Very short adding. There's a kind of inner circle, okay? Those who went with him into exile from 497 BCE to 484 BCE. And Yan Hui was part of that inner circle. That's all.
Thank you for that. So shall we move on? Would you like to read a group? Yeah.
Let's do 7 and 8, and then look at, okay, 7 and 8, and then we go to 9, 10, and 11. Because from now on, we all deal with Yan Hui. So keep in mind on this one. And I will suggest, you know, anyone better keep the chapter 3, post in the war, okay? Because there's 10 students, they constantly show up in Confucius Analects. So whenever we talk about somebody, you can look, oh, which category of this student, that probably help you. So let's read 7 and 8.
So I'm sorry. Go ahead, Betty.
Okay, chapter 7. Shi Gang asked which of the disciples loved to learn. Confucius replied to him, there was Yan Hui, he loved to learn. Unfortunately, his appointed time was short and he died. Now there is no one who loves to learn as he did. 8. When Yan Huan died, Yan Lu begged the carriage of the master to sell and get an outer shell for his son's coffin. The master said, whether he has talents or not talents, everyone calls his son his son. There was Li. When he died, he had a coffin, but no outer shell. I would not walk on foot to get a shell for him because, having followed in the rear of the great officers, it was not proper that I should walk on foot.
This is a pick me up. Ahmad?
Yeah, I agree. And this is one that's very hard to read without some dramatizing. So Jigong asked, which of his disciples loved to learn? And Confucius replied to him, there was Yenhui. He loved to learn. Unfortunately, his appointed time was short and he died. Now there is no one who loves to learn as he did. In verse 8, when Yan Yuan died, Yan Lu begged the carriage of the master to sell and get an outer shell for his son's coffin. The master said, everyone calls his son, whether he has talents or not talents, or has not talents. There was Li when he died. He had a coffin, but no outer shell. I would not walk on foot to get an outer shell for him, because having followed in the rear of the great officers, it is not proper that I should walk on foot.
Thank you, Ahmad. Next up.
So I think it's unfortunately today's section are all a little bit weird. Okay, but I think after we got through this, we should be fine, you know, because we all have a lot of background need to explain. Okay, 11 chapter 7. Okay, it's not 子贡, it's 季康子. Okay, so remember it's a Ji family. Confucius always has a problem with the Ji family. So Ji Kangzi would be the person in charge on the Ji family, because in the state of Ru, the state, they have the 3 houses, and the Ji family is the most powerful. The kind of, I think later on we'll talk about this Ji family. And I think through the Analects, Confucius always has problems with the Ji family. So Ji Kangzi asks, which of the disciples are eager to learn? Okay. So the same question has been asked in the, I think in the book 6, Duke I asked Confucius exactly the same question, and the Confucius had exactly the same answer. Okay, a little bit longer, but same question. So it could be mistake, so they repeat, they are not sure. It could be actually happened. The Duke I, who as the Lord of the state of Ru, asked the question, and later on the Ji family also asked the question. All they asked the question together. Okay, so we don't know, but basically it's the same. If you want to check, it's on book 6, chapter 3. Okay, they have the same question. So basically, Confucius replied. Okay. There was Yan Hui, talking about Yan Hui, was eager to learn. Okay. And then I put it in parentheses because that's the part being recorded on book 6, but it's omitted in this one. He never shifted his anger, he never repeated his error. But in this chapter, it's short. Unfortunately, his life was short. He died. Again, this everything deals with Yan Hui in this book. He's dead already. Now, there are none I have heard of who are eager to learn. Confucius talk about eager to learn, so-called 好学. That's very important. And through, if I don't, I think it's only 3 persons being Confucius think is eager to learn. One is Yan Hui, one is himself, okay? And another one is in book 5, talk about Kong Wenzi, okay? So I don't know who he is, but basically that's another person. Confucius said he's eager to learn. So sounds like eager to learn is a very, very important character. Confucius make it, Kong Wenzi make it, and Yan Hui make it. And look, there's no other people. So that's the chapter 7. Chapter 8 is difficult. Okay, so first, Yan Yuan died. Okay, that's first thing. Yan Lu is his father, Yan Yuan's father. So his father, Yan Lu, asked the master to sell his carriage, Confucius' carriage, to buy an outer coffin for him. Okay, most of the people, when he died, traditionally you have inner coffin and outer coffin. For the person, I think not necessarily rich or the person with high ranking, okay, nobility, they come of high esteemed person, right? Important people will come with the inner coffin and outer coffin. Since Yan Hui is an excellent, talented student and being viewed as a genius, and he died early, his father and Confucius both are very sad. So his father want to bury him not only with inner coffin, also with outer coffin. But they had no money because outer coffin is much more expensive. And Yan Hui was poor, we know that. So he asked Confucius to sell Confucius' carriage, okay, like today, sell your Mercedes, so I can bury buy a coffin for my son. That's his point, okay. So that's Confucius' answer, okay. Confucius' answer is talented or not, okay, 才不才. So basically talk about Yan Hui is talented, okay, or not. He probably talk about his son, okay. His son is not as talented or as Yan Hui, but each man speak of his son, okay. His son is a son, okay. Right now, Confucius is making very important rule in Confucian school, right? You have a talent or not talent. That's everybody different. Some people have high achievement, some people don't. Some people are smart, some people are stupid. But a father is a father. A son is a son. You are my brother, you are my brother. Doesn't matter the way I treat you because you are my younger brother or older brother, or you are my father. It's not related. You are smart or you are stupid or whatever basics. That relationship go prior to your talent. So that's what he's talking about. Doesn't matter your son is talented or not. A son is a son. Okay. When he called about Li, okay, that's Confucius' son's name. Also died early. Okay. I think 2 years before Yan Hui died. Okay. So when my son Li died, he was buried with an inner coffin and without an outer coffin. Okay, because his son died young and it's also not the high-ranking government official, according to Richard, should not have outer coffin. So he didn't have his son, Confucius' own son, buried with outer coffin, right? Then he said, I could not go on foot. Okay, so he implied I would not sell my carriage or sell my Mercedes then I go without car, so I had to go on foot. He cannot do that in order to buy an outer coffin, right? He cannot do it, not because I don't want to sell my Mercedes, because, right, I am one of the grand ministers. I cannot go on foot. For example, like if you are a high-ranking officer, you should not walk in. You have to go on carriage. Okay, that's Confucius talking, because ritual is important. So here he talking about a lot of things about ritual according to that. So first, only certain people can bury with outer coffin, right? So he has to follow that. Doesn't matter he is your son or he is smart, he is stupid, you have to do that. And another rule he has to follow is he is grand minister. He has to go on carriage. Okay, he cannot say, oh, I walk, I save money. Okay, or I sell my, no, the government rule, you have to go on Mercedes. You go on Mercedes because you have to keep it, because that's the rituals. You have to keep it. So this one shows very important message about Confucius' concept of rituals, everything according to decorum, according to this kind etiquette rules. So, okay, so that's it. Thank you, and I'm on.
So I'm going to reserve comment, and I'm going to ask everyone else to reserve comment as well, so we can get to the next three, because the next three very much tie through, and that will free our last half hour so we can have open comment. So let's just get to reading the next three, and then we can go back and sort of unpack this.
I think that that's a great idea. So if you'd be so kind, Penny, I don't mean to put you on the spot each time.
That's okay. 9. When Yanwan died, the master said, "Alas, heaven is destroying me. Heaven is destroying me." 10. When Yanwan died, the master bewailed him exceedingly. And the disciples who were with him said, "Master, your grief is excessive." "Is it excessive?" said he. "If I am not to mourn bitterly for this man, for whom should I mourn?" 11. When Yanhui died, the disciples wished to give him a great funeral, and the master said, "You may not do so." The disciples did bury him in great style. The master said, "We behaved towards me as his father. I have not been able to treat him as my son. The fault is not mine. It belongs to you, O disciples."
Thank you, Penny.
Mine's exactly the same. So
Okay. So Jason.
Yeah, actually, from 8 to 11 should all deal with Yan Hui's death. Okay, so chapter 9. Okay, Yan Hui said, Yan Hui died. Master said, "Alas, heaven is killing me. Heaven is killing me." So I think that's why, he died early, because Yan Hui is the only person Confucius see can continue his teaching. That's why he said that heaven is killing me. That's very heavy word. So number 10, Yan Hui died. The master wept for him grievously. His followers said, "Master, you grieve too much." The master said, "Do I grieve too much? If I do not grieve for him, then for whom?" Okay, I think that's the same thing. We probably don't need, because Confucius is very, very sad. I even say the heaven is killing me. So the last part, the last one, chapter 11, it's interesting. Okay. Yan Hui died. Okay, and all started with Yan Hui died. The disciples wish to give him a grand funeral. The master said, "You may not." Okay, I already explained. According to the rituals, Yan Hui is the one great person, talented, good behavior, but he never got any government job. So he has no title, have a grand funeral. Okay, but the disciple did bury him with grand funeral. Like the disciple didn't listen to Confucius. Okay, the Confucius comment is interesting, and I would like to see how everyone think about this. Right? The master said, "Hui looked upon me as his father, but I have not been able to treat him as my son. This was not my idea. It was this boy's idea." So basically he said, okay, I don't know what's Confucius, I think this one capture what Confucius mood, right? He, in a way, feel very sad on that, and then he want to insist on the ritual, according to the ritual, and you should not give him a grand funeral, but the student insist doing so, and Confucius, "Oh no, that's I didn't do that. They do it." Okay, so that probably is his word. Okay. So Amang, what you want to say?
So I just finally got to see John Wick 4. I'm very happy that I finally checked that off my box. For those who aren't familiar, and no one has to care, but those movies were meant to be a meditation on the stages of grief. That was the subtext of those movies. And if you're not familiar with the Kubler-Ross model, the staging of grief model, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was the person who came up with it and said that, you know, they aren't necessarily sequential. It's not something in her own lifetime as she was diagnosed with a terminal disease. She said, I've never gotten over anger. I'm still in the state of anger. I bring this up because I'm reading these and I'm looking at them again through this new lens, and I'm struck. I'm absolutely almost thunderstruck by how step by step Confucius goes through the stages of grief. The soliloquy that is 11:7 is the stage of depression. There was Yenhui, now there's no one. Stage 8 is anger. He lashes out at Yanhui's father for making such a presumptive sort of request. And it may be that it's unmerited or it's merited, but it's still a little taste of his anger. 9, shock. Heaven is killing me. Heaven is killing me. He expects to die. This should be the end of him. 10, guilt. The entire thing is a guilt trip. You're grieving too much. Well, if I don't grieve for him, then who should I grieve for? And maybe he does feel guilty that he's violating norms. But 11 is both denial and acceptance, literally denying his brothers their request, acceptance that Yanhui is gone, and that these boys will do it anyway, even though it's a 10, by the way, is a violation of norms. He's violating the norm of how much wailing and grieving he should do. 11 is a violation of ritual, of li. That is more sacrosanct, and that can't be done, as is the, will you sell your carriage for an expensive outer coffin? These are ritual. These are more important than even keeping to the norms. But here you've got all 6 stages: depression, anger, shock, guilt, acceptance, and denial, laid out by Confucius 3,000 years before Kubler-Ross. So she should stick that in her pipe and smoke it.
She may have plagiarized, this is what you're saying. So, and I very much appreciate the connection with John Wick. Very well done. Quan.
Oops, sorry for the delay. Here, I would like to go back to the question of Van or contour versus pattern, okay? Because here, it is obvious that Confucius deeply loved Yanhui because he see that young man as his possible successor at the head of the school. And so his political ambition and his philosophical ambition has been completely destroyed when Yanhui died before him. Hence the wailing and hence the despair. So that the despair was real. But at the same time, he will not violate the prescription of rituals from the Zhou dynasty, because Yanhui was not of the rank of a minister, and there's no reason why he should relinquish his chariot to make an outer coffin for Yanhui, okay? Because they needed the wood from his chariot to make the outer coffin, okay? So that was the sacrifice that was asked to him. But it's not because he was selfish, okay? Because he was a man of the Zhou dynasty, and a man of a Zhou dynasty is a man deeply involved in rituals. And it is absolutely impossible to violate a ritual because he is of a ministerial rank, and a man of ministerial rank have to move around in a chariot, and a man of not ministerial rank cannot have an outer coffin, even if he's outstanding as a person. So when I was speaking of patterns as a very honorable synonym for culture, it is precisely an outstanding, if not blazing, illustration of pattern, in the sense that, and those pattern or those regularity of prescriptions of behavior are predictable and are carry on over times. Okay, even if the Chinese are not as maniac as 25 centuries ago, the Chinese are still a people quite obedient to rituals, even if in all all cultures have rituals, but the Chinese one is a culture a lot defined by rituals, and the difference precisely between to obey blindly to rituals or rituals as shining forth because you truly have the inner being corresponding to that ritual. So most of the time, the the justification for that framework of ritual is that if you truly have the inner being to understand that, you would have that behavior. But if you don't have the inner being to understand that, you better follow the rituals because at least you can have an appearance of a civilized person. I stop here.
Thank you for that. Quan, Jason, you want to?
Yeah, I think when Quan said this one, I realized the translation is wrong. Okay, so all translation, I think not only mine, because I'm also checking the Chinese interpreter. Okay, about the selling your carriage for the outer coffin. I think it's in the Chinese word here, it doesn't say selling your carriage. It sounds weird. It sounds like today, you know, you have no money, you sell your car to other. I think it's wrong. Okay, I'm checking the interpretation. I think including Zhu Xi's interpretation could be wrong. Okay, I think the reason is this: it's just borrowed to use your card to carry the inner coffin and bury it, and then you still can take back your car. It's not sell it, okay? Because it's very odd. You ask your student, your son's teacher to sell your car and then bury. I think it's very strange. And then for Confucius to bury his son and sell his car, no, I think it's just use the carriage as outer carriage to bring the inner coffin to the graveyard and bury it, and the outer the card still can come back to use. So Confucius reject this one, okay, because it's not following the ritual. So actually, it's not sell his car, just borrow his car. And I look at the Chinese character, just use it, and it make more sense. So to sell it is wrong, you know, in my opinion, in this way. I don't know, Quan, how do you think? I think that's the right answer, right?
Yes, I think that you open here a new interpretation that is very interesting, and which anyway respect the core of the meaning, okay, in the sense that Confucius was truly a man of the Zhou dynasty and of the Zhou culture. And gods know if that Zhou culture influence what are the Chinese nowadays. And it is out of the question that a man who is not of ministerial rank can have an out of coffin and can have his coffin paraded, if you want, on a chariot. Okay, I think what you say is very interesting, but in either case, it goes back to that centrality of ritual in Chinese culture. Okay, and once again, I repeat,
Right.
And it comes from the education of all Chinese kids. and it often comes back to in the mouth of their parents. If you have the inner being to understand that ritual, of course you are an advanced person, and that what we wish for you. But you don't have if you don't have the inner being to understand the prescription of that ritual, well, just do it, because at least you will appear as a civilized person. I stop here again.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ahmad.
Yeah, just quick.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that it's not as foreign a concept as it may sound. The idea that following the ritual for the ritual's sake is absolutely necessary. We get the same message in Western culture in 101 Christmas movies that are trying to teach us to really understand the true spirit of Christmas, which is tradition stacked on tradition, stacked on tradition, that just keeps going and keeps going. But we're meant to enact it so that we imbibe the deeper meaning of it. This is just a sliver example that I can point to that most people can relate to in a Western culture, that is souped up on steroids and applicable to just about everything, from how you greet someone to how you sit at dinner to how you comport yourself in a classroom in Chinese culture.
Thank you for that, Ahmad.
I'd like to say I just checked on the Zhu Xi's interpretation. Zhu Xi said Yan Hui's father asked Confucius to sell his carriage in order to buy an outer coffin. I think he made a big mistake, you know. And then I know most of the Chinese scholars, they don't think, they just follow the ancient scholar said. So that's why I keep copy and the copy. Nobody really think about it. Doesn't make sense. I think it doesn't make sense if you use common sense to think about any culture, not only Chinese. You ask somebody to sell your carriage, which is important thing, and to buy coffin for his son. It's very strange, but it just ask him to use the carriage to carry the inner coffin. Okay, so you can bury instead of use people to carry the coffin, but use the car. So Confucius reject this one based on ritual. I think that makes more sense. And the big mistake is from Zhu Xi. He just said sell the. I just checked his original. He said willing to sell car in order to buy carriage. I think that's a mistake. Zhu Xi constantly make mistake. I know.
So I don't know if there are any other comments on these particular passages, but I'll actually leave it open for discussion about any of the first 11 passages of chapter 11. One of the things I think back, I don't know if it was chapter 7. I really don't remember, but we did talk about how to handle grief with Confucius, and one of the things that I remember thinking about this, how emotions are actually just managed in general. And is there any kind of way that Confucius actually approaches emotion and overall, like how to necessarily, what does he think? Like, is there an overreaction to any event? Specifically, though, I know that he handled death very differently than Shuangzi, if I say correctly.
Yeah,
Zhuangzi.
I can. Oh,
Sorry.
Amang, you want to talk about? I'll let you go first.
Aman or
Hong, you want to say something?
Oh no, go ahead.
Quan, do you want to?
Jason, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to say I don't. I think the more detail is in Zhuang. I think it's Zhongyong, right? The doctrine of the mean. Okay.
Yeah.
发乎情，止乎礼, right? So it's kind of you have your emotion to go out, you feel sad, but you will stop there. Okay, doctrine of the mean, you will stop there. Okay, according to Richard. So your son died, you are very sad. That's your emotion, you go out. But son is a son. You should not cry as your mother died or as your father died. That's the ritual. That's a social boundary on that. So to Confucius, that's very important. Not only on sad, also in angry, right? When you do something bad to me, I'm very angry, but I don't burst out and give you the dirty word. I will angry. I will look at you straightly, but I will stop there. Okay. I will not be like coward. You insult me and I just turn my head around, or just like Jesus, turn your cheek. When you slap me, I will be angry. I look at you straightly, very straightforward, look at you straightly. But I will do things according to ritual. That's Confucius' teaching. Zhuangzi or Taoist teaching would be slightly different, but I would say in the same sense. You will say, Zhuangzi will say, that's forget about human emotion. Okay, avoid the emotion. He called the human bondage. So you have to be free from the human bondage. Same sense as I constantly talk about this, is same sense as Spinoza's idea, human bondage. You have emotion, too much sensation. That's your suffering. That's so-called human bondage. You have to be free from that. Okay, but solution is different. Spinoza, I talk about you have to use, you rationalize, you believe God, but Zhuangzi is a different way. You should avoid it, see everything as nature. So you will live a happy life. I think that's the slightly different school.
Thank you for that, Jason. Quan. Go ahead, Quan.
Okay. What I want to say is that let's not forget that this book, the Lun Yu, has been selected in 136 BCE with other books as part of a corpus for the imperial classical education in China. And that corpus lasted 21 centuries. Okay, so even if we read with attention the Analects, we can see that Confucius was probably a man with a certain kind of special humor, that he expresses his emotions, that he tends to be sarcastic and ironical. So we have certain traits of his personality that have not been erased through what I would call the imperial framework that has been chosen for the classical education of the imperial elite for 21 centuries. But let's not forget that those books were official documents used within the elite for certain purposes, okay, to have to create a commonality within the ruling class. So even if the true personality of Confucius has not been completely erased from it, let's not forget that all the prevention about too much expressing our own emotion is related to that classical education of the imperial elite. So it was my small social comment. I finish here.
Thank you for that, Quan. Mark, do you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I want to thank Ahmad for that really interesting connection between the Kubler stages and what's going on in Confucius. And I was just wondering about that expression of anger, heaven. What is it? Heaven is undoing me, or
Heaven is killing me or destroying me.
yeah. And I was wondering, since heaven and earth and the other elements play such an important role, what is the significance of him connecting his anger to heaven, and is there some connection between that and death?
I can tackle this just briefly. I'll let others say more about it, but the actual expression, Tang Su Yu, is literally heaven, death, I. It connotes the idea that there is celestial order, that when we've talked about before, the idea that the heavens, the celestial sky that you can observe at night, is a perfect reflection of a perfect order in the classic Chinese mind. And because of that, there's a belief that its tenets, its precepts will usurp anyone else's. This is not quite the same idea, parallel as fate or destiny in the Western world, but it's close enough of a concept to be able to sort of overlay for the purposes here. And so really we would interpret this as, the fates have befallen me. Destiny has my death in mind. Destiny seeks my destruction. I remember, because I've had to perform a few funerals, and one of the things that was once said to me was, remember, a person who loses a parent loses their past. A person who loses their spouse loses their present, and a person who loses a child loses their future. So what Jason was saying before about, this being, the prodigal son who was, or maybe it was Yu Quan who was saying, this was who's going to inherit the school. This is the future of my entire program in one man. When he's saying heaven is killing me, he's saying it's destroyed my future. And it is fated because the heavens decree it to be so. There's nothing I can do otherwise.
Yeah, thank you, Amang. And I think I agree with you. That I'll take this one, the heaven killing me, as a rhetorical. So Confucius really said. Okay, so I need to go in a minute, and then thank you everyone for restarting. And the next week we probably can finish this book. So I think I need to do some work, especially for the last chapter. It's long. So
No, I think we got a lot done, and I like the way this actually went today. And I'm open to any kind of comments about that, but I would just say it's pretty interesting overall about when we're going through this, is just Confucius' relationship with his students. Each one of them is actually, it's interesting to see how the dynamic is kind of going, and how everything, kind of rested on the idea of one. I'm going to say his name, Yan Wei Wan. Yeah, am I saying that correct?
Both are actually correct.
No,
Yan Hui or Yan Yuan. Both were correct.
yeah, I think that's the last chapter, because that's the interaction with all his, I would not say all, a lot of his students. So that's really depict his relationship with disciples. So I thank you very much, and I'll see you next week. And then I think Amang and I will work harder on this one. Basically, I need to work harder, finish it. This one. Anyways, Ben,